The god was now on the point of launching his bolts on the whole wide earth, but he feared the conflagration might cause the holy ether to catch fire too in a blaze from pole to pole. He also remembered the fate's decree that a time would arrive when the sea and the land and the royal palace of heaven would burst into flames and the complex mass of the universe come to grief. So he put the lightning, forged in the Cyclops' workshop, aside, and chose a different method of punishing mortals by massing his storm clouds over the sky and destroying the race in a great flood, all of the gales which scattered the gathering clouds, and among them the north wind Aquilo, Jupiter promptly imprisoned inside the caverns of Aeolus. Notice, the wind of the south, he released. Notice flew out on his soaking wings, his terrible visage covered in pitchy gloom. His beard was a bundle of rainstorms. Water streamed from his hoary locks, his forehead a cushion for mists. His wings and foldings of his garments were sodden and dripping. He squeezed the bank of menacing clouds like a sponge, and a thunderclap followed. Instantly rain poured down from the sky in torrents. Juno's messenger, decked in her mantle of many colors, Iris the rainbow, sucked up moisture to thicken the clouds. The corn was flattened, the farmer wept for his wasted prayers, and all the fruits of a long year's labor were gone to no purpose. Jupiter's anger did not stop short in the sky, his own kingdom. Neptune, the sea god, deployed his waters to aid his brother. He summoned the rivers, and, when they arrived at their master's palace, he spoke to the meeting. "No need for a lengthy harangue," he said. "Pour forth in the strength that is yours. It is needed. Open the floodgates. Down with the barriers. Give full rein to the steeds of your streams." He had spoken. The rivers returned to relax the curbs on their sources, and then rolled down to the ocean flats in unbridled career. Neptune himself struck the earth with his trident. It trembled under the blow, and the raging torrent gushed from the chasm. Bursting their confines, the river engulfed the plains and the valleys, the orchards along with the crops, and the cattle along with the people. Houses and shrines with their sacred possessions were swept to oblivion. Dwellings which stood their ground and were able to face such an onslaught, untoppled, were still submerged from above by an overwhelming mountainous wave, which leveled their pinnacles deep in the flood tide. And now no more could the land and the sea be clearly distinguished. The world was reduced to an ocean without any coastline. Look at the man on that hill, or sitting alone in his fishing boat, rowing across the fields where he recently guided his plowshare. Another is sailing above his cornfields, or over the roof of his vanished farmhouse, or casting his line in the top of an elm tree. He might have dropped anchor to catch in the soil of a grassy meadow, or else his dinghy is scraping the vineyard trellis below him. There in the field where the slender goats were lately browsing, on tufts of grass, the seals are resting their clumsy bodies. Under water the Nereids gaze in utter amazement at coppices, cities, and buildings. The woods are invaded by dolphins, blundering into the branches and bumping the trunks till they shake them. Wolves are swimming among the sheep. Tawny lions and tigers are swept along in the flood. No use to the boar is his lightning strength, nor the speed of his legs to the floundering stag. At the end of a tedious search for land and a resting place, with wings exhausted, the wandering bird flutters down to the waves. Small hills are completely submerged by the sea in its limitless freedom, and billows are strangely beating against the peaks of the mountains. All but a few have been drowned in the flood, and any survivors, for shortage of food, are destroyed by long-drawn-out starvation. Focus lies in the country between Boeotia and Thessaly, fertile land when still it was land. At the time of the flood, it was a part of the sea and a plain of suddenly spreading water. Here you can visit a twin-peaked mountain called Parnassus, towering up to the stars and hiding its head in the clouds. This was the only feature the ocean had left uncovered, and here Deucalion, sailing a tiny boat with his wife, ran around. On landing they paid the homage due to the nymphs of the great Corician cave, the mountain spirits, and Themis, goddess of prophecy then in control of the Delphic oracle. You'd never find a better or right-minded man than Deucalion, neither a more God-fearing woman than Pyrrha. When Jupiter saw that the world was a pool of swirling water, that only one was left of so many thousand men, and only one was left of so many thousand women, both of them guiltless of sin, and both devout in their worship. He scattered the mists with the north wind's help. He banished the storm clouds, exposing the earth once more to the sky, and the sky to the earth. Neptune's anger subsided as well. Laying his trident aside, he calmed the turbulent waters and called upon Triton, the sea-green merman, who heaved his shoulders, encrusted by nature with shells of the murex, above the surface, with orders to blow on his resonant conch and signal the rivers and waves to withdraw. Triton lifted his hollow horn, which wreathes in a spiral, up from its mouthpiece to broaden out to a bell. The horn whose notes, when once he had filled it with breath in the midst of the deep, rebounded on the echoing shoreline from east to west. So then, when the gods had raised his instrument up to his lips, with the salt drops gleaming down from his beard, and the blast had sounded the bidden retreat, it was heard by all the water of land and ocean, and all the waters by which it was heard were held in check. The sea recovered its shores, the rivers, though full, were confined to their channels, the flooding receded, the hills were seen to emerge, the earth rose up, as the waves died down, dry land expanded. At the end of a long, long day, the tops of the trees in the forest began to appear, their leaves still thick with a coating of slime. The world was restored, but when Deucalion saw it was empty, and felt the silence brooding over the desolate earth, he burst into tears and said to Pyrrha, his dear companion, "My cousin, my wife, and only woman who still survives, first we were tied by our kindred blood, and then by our marriage. And now our very danger unites us. Here is the world with its glorious lands, from east to west, and here we are an inglorious crowd of two. All else belongs to the sea, and yet, indeed, we can hardly be certain the life that we have is safely assured. These clouds still fill me with fear and foreboding. How would you now be feeling, my poor dear love, if I had been lost and you had been snatched from death? How could you have suffered, fear on your own, with no one there to comfort your sorrow? Believe me, if you were lying beneath the waves, my beloved, I should follow you there to be drowned in the waves beside you. I wish I could use my father's Prometheus skill to create mankind once again, and breathe new life into molded clay. Today we too are all that is left of the human race. That is the will of the gods. We survive as nothing but relics." He spoke and they wept. They then decided to pray to the heavenly power of Themis, and crave her help in a sacred oracle. Speedily, side by side, they made their way to Cephisus. The river was still disturbed, but cutting its usual channel. Drawing some water, they sprinkled it over their heads and their garments, and bent their footsteps toward the shrine of the holy goddess. Its gable was pale with unsightly moss, and the fires on the altar were dead. When they reached the temple steps, they both prostrated themselves and fearfully pressed their lips on the cold, hard pavement, saying aloud, "If the prayers of the righteous can soften the hearts of the gods and win them over, transforming their anger to kindness, gentle Themis, declare to us how to repair the loss of our wretched race, and come to the aid of our deluged world." The heart of the goddess was moved, and she gave her response to them, saying, "Leave the sanctuary, cover your heads and ungirdle your garments, then cast the bones of your mighty mother behind your backs." They were long dumbfounded. Pyrrha was the first to break the silence and voice her protest aloud. She refused to obey the goddess's commands. With trembling lips she begged for pardon, too frightened to give such offense to her mother's ghost by casting her dead bones. Meanwhile they silently pondered the words of the puzzling reply, which had come from the oracle's dark recess, and discussed them together. Prometheus's son then gently suggested, to calm Epimetheus's daughter, "Unless my wits are awry and sorely deceiving me, oracles must be holy and never command what is sinful. Our mighty mother is earth. I believe what is meant by her bones are stones on her body, and these we are bidden to cast behind us." Though Pyrrha was much impressed by her husband's interpretation, her hopes still wavered. They both distrusted the oracle's bidding, but saw little harm in trying. Proceeding down from the temple, they covered their heads, ungirded their robes, and stepped out boldly, scattered some stones behind their backs, as the oracle ordered. Who would believe what ensued, if it wasn't confined by tradition? The stones started to lose their essential hardness, slowly to soften, and then to assume a new shape. They soon grew larger, and gathered a nature more gentle than stone. An outline of human form could be seen, not perfectly clear, like a rough-hewn statue, partially carved from the marble and not yet properly finished, but still the parts of the stone which consisted of earth and contained some moisture was turned into flesh. The solid, inflexible matter was changed into bones, and the veins of the rock into veins of blood. In a moment of time, by the will of the gods, the stones that were thrown from the hands of a man were transformed to take on the appearance of men, and women were fashioned anew from those that were thrown by a woman. And so our race is a hard one. We work by the sweat of our brow, and bear the unmistakable marks of our stony origin. Other creatures after their various kinds came forth from the earth by spontaneous self-generation. The lingering moisture was warmed by the rays of the sun, and the heat made the mud in the water-logged marshes swell and expand. The seeds of life were fed in the mother's womb of life-giving soil which engendered them, growing in course of time to the shapes of the different species. Such we can see when the seven-mouthed Nile has withdrawn from the flood-drenched fields and brought its waters back to their normal channels. After the freshly deposited mud grows hot in the sunshine, the farmers, turning the clods with their plows, discover a horde of new creatures. Some have arrived on the threshold of life and can even be watched at the moment of birth, while others are still half-formed and without their limbs. It will sometimes appear in a single body that one of its parts is alive and the rest is composed of mere earth. When heat and moisture are blended, we know that they lead to conception. Everything owes its first beginnings to these two elements. Though fire is at war with water, their combination produces the whole of nature, procreation from friendly enmity. So at the time straight after the flood, when the earth was muddy and heated again from above by the rays of the sun, it produced an infinite number of species. Some of the forms which emerged were familiar before, but others were new and amazing creatures. Amongst these forms was an unknown serpent, the monstrous python, also brought forth by earth at the time, though she cannot have witness for it. Sprawling over Parnassus, it horribly frightened the newborn peoples, until it was killed by the deadly shafts of Apollo, whose only targets before were the timid gazelles and the roe deer. The snake was transfixed by 1,000 arrows, the quiver was almost emptied, and out of its wounds were spewed black gushes of venom. In order that time should never destroy the fame of this exploit, Apollo established the sacred games, attended by huge crowds. The Pythian games, called after the serpent he vanquished, Python. Here the athletes who won their events on track or on field, or the chariot race, would receive the glorious crown of an oak wreath, the laurel that had not yet appeared, and Phoebus would garland the flowing locks of his comely head with any available foliage. Apollo's first love was Daphne, the child of the river, Peneus. Blind chance was not to be blamed, but Cupid's spiteful resentment. Phoebus, still in the flush of his victory over the serpent, had noticed the love-god bending his bow and drawing the string to his shoulder, and asked him, "What are you doing with grown-up weapons, you mischievous boy? That bow would better be carried by me, when I fire my shafts at my foes or beasts. They are unfailingly wounded. My numberless arrows have just destroyed the venomous python, which filled whole acres of mountainside with its belly's infections. You be content with your torch, and use it to kindle some passion or other, but don't usurp my honors belonging to me." The son of Venus replied, "Your arrows, Apollo, can shoot whatever you choose, but I'll shoot you. As mortal creatures must yield to a god, your glory will likewise prove to be subject to mine." Then he beat his wings and cut a path through the atmosphere, nimbly alighting upon the heights of shady Parnassus. Once there, he drew from his quiver 2 arrows of contrary purpose. One is for arousing passion, the other is meant to repel it. The former is made of gold, and its head has a sharp, bright point, while the latter is blunt and weighted with lead one side of the reed shaft. That was the arrow which Cupid implanted in Daphne's bosom. The other was aimed at Apollo, and smote to the core of his being. Phoebus at once was filled with desire, But Daphne fled from the very thought of a lover. She joyed in the forest lairs, and in spoils of captive beasts, like the virgin goddess Diana, binding her carelessly flowing locks in a simple headband. Courted by suitors in droves, Peneus' daughter rejected them. Stubbornly single, she roamed through the woodland thickets, without concern for the meaning of marriage or love or physical union. Often her father remarked, "You owe me a son, my daughter," or else he would say, "Now when, my child, will you give me a grandson?" Marriage torches to Daphne were nothing less than anathema. Blushes of shame would spread all over her beautiful cheeks. She would lovingly cling to her father's neck in a coaxing appeal, and say to him, "Darling father, I want to remain a virgin forever. Please let me. Diana's father allowed her that." Peneus granted her wish, but Daphne's peculiar beauty and personal charm were powerful bars to her prayer's fulfillment. Phoebus caught sight of her, fell in love, and longed to possess her. Wishes were hopes, for even his powers of prophecy failed him. Think of the flimsy stubble which burns in a harvested cornfield, and think of a blazing hedgerow, fired by a torch which a traveller has carelessly brought too close or dropped behind him at daybreak. So was the god as his heart caught fire and the flames spread through to the depths of his soul, and passion was fueled with empty hope. He eyes the hair hanging loosely over his neck, and murmurs, "What if that hair were neatly arranged?" He looks at her bright eyes, burning and twinkling like stars. He studies her lips so teasingly, tempting. He fondly admires her hands with their delicate fingers. He dotes on the shapely arms, so neat, bare to the shoulder. What's hidden, he thinks, must be even better. But swift as the light breeze, Daphne is gone, with never a pause as he calls out after her, "Stop, dear Daphne, I beg you to stop. This isn't an enemy chasing you. Stop. You would think I'm a wolf pursuing a lamb, a lion hunting a deer, or an eagle pouncing on fluttering doves in midair. But I am not. It is love that impels me to follow you. Have pity. How frightened I am that you'll fall and scratch those innocent legs in the brambles. You mustn't hurt on account of me. The ground where you're rushing away is so rough. Slow down, my beloved. I beg you. Don't run so fast, and I promise to slow down too. Now ask who it is that desires you. I'm not a wild mountain dweller. This isn't an uncouth shepherd, minding the flocks and the herds. Round here, impetuous girl, you have no idea who you're running from. That's why you're running so fast. Listen, I am the master of Delphi, Clarus and Tenedos, Patara's temple too. My father is Jupiter. I can reveal the past, the present, and future. To all who seek them, I am the lord of the lyre and song. My arrows are deadly, but one is even more deadly than they are, the shaft which has smitten a heart that has never been wounded before. Healing is my invention. The world invokes me as helper, and I am the one who dispenses the herbs with the power to cure. Alas! No herbs have the power to cure the disease of my love. Those arts which comfort the whole of mankind cannot comfort their master. Apollo wanted to say much more, but the terrified Daphne ran all the faster. She left him behind with his speech unfinished. Her beauty was visible still, as her limbs were exposed by the wind. The breezes which blew in her face managed also to flutter her dress, and the currents of air succeeded in blowing her tresses behind her. Flight made her all the more lovely, but now the god in his youthful ardor was ready no longer to squander his breath on wheedling pleas. Spurred on by desire, he followed the trail with new vigor. Imagine a greyhound, imagine a hare it has sighted in open country, one running to capture his prey, the other for safety. The hound is about to close in with his jaws. He believes he is almost there. He is grazing the back of her heels with the tip of his muzzle. The hare isn't sure if her hunter has caught her, but leaps into freedom, clear of the menacing jaws and the mouth which keeps brushing against her. So with Apollo and Daphne, the one of them racing in hope, and the other in fear. But the god has the pinions of love to encourage him. Faster than she, he allows her no rest, his hands now close to the fugitive shoulders, his breath now ruffling the hair on her neck. Her strength exhausted, the girl grew pale. Then, overcome by the effort of running, she saw Peneus' waters before her. "Help me, father," she pleaded. "If rivers have power over nature, mar the beauty which has made me admired too well, by changing my form." She had hardly ended her prayer when a heavy numbness came over her body. Her soft white bosom was ringed in a layer of bark. Her hair was turned into foliage, her arms into branches. The feet that had run so nimbly were sunk into sluggish roots. Her hand was confined in a tree-top, and all that remained was her beauty. Tree though she was, Apollo still loved her, caressing the trunk with his hand. He could feel the heart still fluttering under the new bark. Seizing the branches, as though they were limbs in his arms' embrace, he pressed his lips to the wood, but the wood still shrank from his kisses. Phoebus then said to her, "Since you cannot be mine in wedlock, you must at least be Apollo's tree. It is you who will always be twined in my hair, on my tuneful lyre, and my quiver of arrows. The generals of Rome shall be wreathed with you, when the jubilant paean of triumph is raised, and a long procession ascends the Capitol. On either side of Augustus's gate your tree shall stand sentry, faithful guarding the crown of oak leaves, hanging between them, as I, with my hair that is never cut, am eternally youthful, so you with evergreen leaves are for glory and praise everlasting." Apollo the healer had done. With a wave of her new-formed branches, the laurel agreed, and seemed to be nodding her head in the treetop.